today comes back to about 15 years of work. I was on a call last night with a fellow Jim Herrig, and for a couple of hours. And Jim, I met him at Vegas, as a matter of fact, while at a AICPA conference. And Jim was there talking to other firms about how to integrate wealth management. Jim's been just a great friend. And I think it started off with us having a bet on who was going to win the hockey at that year, but it's developed into so much more. When I go back over some of the sort of the milestones, I assumed after learning, as he described sort of a model where you put together CPA firms and wealth managers, I mean, it just seems so logical to me, okay? You got different people doing different things but working on a similar client. And I thought it was so logical that I assumed it would be logical to Canadians and our regulators too. Not so much. And it took 6 years to discuss with the regulators why this was important, why it was good for CPAs, why it was good for clients. And eventually, we did get Rule 216 redone. But a little bit, like I actually went to one of the council meetings one year, and it was interesting to see the reception there. If anybody dare sort of play with the rules, you were seen as a renegade. So innovation in our field sometimes isn't really accepted within the profession. But most of you are dealing with entrepreneurial clients. And their reality is they had to innovate to be successful. So to do something different than other people actually led to their success. So at the end of the day, I think the model that we're going to talk about today comes from many years of learning from others. Rick has just been an excellent mentor in the last 2 to 3 years. Bob Simpson at the back, who was my business coach, I think 20 years ago, and he used to slap me around on a regular basis of, you know, don't chase the latest shiny bauble. But today I have to say I think we have a model that is delivering in a meaningful way for clients and has proven to me the integration idea. No, wrong way. So this comes out of something that is printed on an annual basis by Accounting Today in the US, Wealth Magnets Report. And in 2021, there are now over 60 CPA-centric wealth management operations that have over $1 billion in assets under management, okay? Jim Herrig is the guy on the right. He looks a little older now. But Jim is the fellow that was one of the founders of a firm called HKFS. I think that's about 25 years ago. And along the way, it's like anything, you know, you think you know what you're doing until you actually do it. And then you learn about the areas that you hadn't even considered. And so it's been very helpful that he had sort of a 20-year head start, has been on our advisory board for many years, and has just been also a great mentor. I asked the question of Sean, who's the quicker adopter between Canadians and Americans, and it didn't surprise me that the first people to jump were the American CPAs as compared to Canadian. But I'm very happy to hear, but the follow-through are the Canadians. If we were down in the United States and you were a client of a CPA firm, it would be unusual if you weren't having a discussion about some of the areas that were on that list that Rick showed, okay? Obviously tax, but retirement planning, estate planning, and that sort of thing. It's just commonplace, okay? And as Carrie Neufeld was talking about, life goals, I realized as I'm sitting there, this is actually one of my life goals, is to make this ingrained in the CPA world, because I absolutely believe it's in your client's interest, and I really believe it's in the CPA's interest. Peggy's been incredibly patient and I've had more than one scolding about just be a little bit patient on, especially with the regulatory world. But you eventually get around to getting the logic and why it actually works for this group. Okay, I'm going to learn this eventually today. Okay, so you've seen something like this already from Rick, because this is really Wellement. And there are some times where you're in business for a while and you've been doing things the same old way, and then something comes in out of left field and you say, wow, is that ever a game changer? And I have to say that this picture, when we show this to clients, this is in our introductory package, they get it instantly, because they know that they've got a lot of the things going on in their life. Okay? And one of the areas of that I'm finding is sometimes of the greatest interest with the most affluent is the one on the left, family vision and goals. Last week, Bob Simpson and I were down in, I think, Milwaukee, Chicago, Columbus, Ohio, and two other cities that I forgot. New York, Cincinnati. There you go. Thank you, Bob. And one of the people, and we were actually out looking at a particular way to invest in real estate. Now, if I were to say to people, we were down looking at office towers, people would say, as an investment, seriously? But the reality is, we were down there with a Montreal-based, very, very high net worth family who is buying office buildings today, throughout COVID, has 220 office buildings now. Some of them are the size of First Canadian Place, by the way. And they're buying things because they can buy them at today's net asset value or net operating income. And even though some of them may be down to 55% occupancy, they're buying it to give them a yield today of about 8%, fill it up somewhat, and what an excellent return. So, there to me was an example in the real estate business, because a lot of people, let's face it, everybody's been wondering, who's going to go to the office? Now, they also check about the, whether they could actually convert some of the things to condos and things like that after that. They're doing their due diligence to make sure they're trying to always mitigate risk. But by being different, they are incredibly successful. One of the people on that trip, his name is Dennis Santos. Dennis was the chief investment officer for the family that started Target stores in the U.S. And a low-key guy. We had some other pretty interesting people with some pretty interesting backgrounds. But one of the things that Dennis was saying is that they've now got in that family, I think there's 140 members that are effectively connected to the family wealth. And, different levels of connection. They're into third and fourth and fifth generation in some cases. They know where the money came from, but they're so far away from the Target operations today. And by the way, it used to be called Dayton Hudson, not Target at all. And I said, so just on, or actually being moved city to city by a private jet, and I said, Dennis, of the things that you do, what do you believe is the most valuable thing that you brought to the family? And he said, financial education. And he's the CIO. It's not this better investment or this unique way of buying real estate. He said it's financial education. Because when it comes down to family vision and values, one of the things that they try to do intergenerationally is get across the idea of how the money was made. It didn't just grow on trees, obviously. In the early days, it was a heck of a lot of work. And the people that, in the early stages, what's important to them is to not just pass along the money, but pass along the vision, values. And if they do that, they believe that the wealth can create an opportunity. And Rick, you alluded to this, enough to do anything, not enough to do nothing. I would say when we show this to clients, they get it. And hopefully I got the right one here. And this is the other slide that we often use. I stole this one on the right from Jim Herrig's firm. That yarn ball where you've got Wells Stewards client, and then when we work with accounting firms, we typically put the name of the firm in there, okay? So, we say a picture paints 1,000 words. Most of the people that you deal with, the clients you deal with, they're not left-brain people. Most entrepreneurs are right-brain people. They're the creative ones, right? And so if you show them pictures, quite honestly, they get it way more than a spreadsheet. I'm sure none of you have experienced trying to explain somebody's year-end financial statements to them, and especially if they bring their spouse in who isn't connected, how engaged they are throughout. Not so much. That's a tough challenge to get that across. I've now seen some of the CPA firms literally using pictures and size of pictures or the size of a dollar sign to show that the income increased year over year. And here's what your net worth is. Who here on a regular basis prepares a net worth statement for their clients? You guys in the wealth management business don't count. Larry? Okay. So it's such an outlier to actually prepare a net worth statement. So I guess we assume that people know. They don't know. And they certainly don't know what the progress is. So in one of the slides that Rick showed, it was sort of a summation, and it had net worth on the right-hand side. One of the adaptations we've made is showing the growth from year to year. And what's interesting is if you look at COVID, if you even look at, take a snapshot through to the end of the last quarter in the investment markets. We've had a tough year in the investment markets. That doesn't mean their net worth went down. It was just maybe in another area. They may have a business. They may have real estate that's actually gone up. And so what we're trying to do is to connect the dots to what's really important. And you can't necessarily just ask the question, what's important to you and what would you like us to produce for you? Sometimes they wouldn't even be able to answer that. But by looking at best practices and learning from others, Rick, Bob, people that we run into down in the States, you can develop some tools that are very, very helpful in conveying that message. So that figure is, again, something that gets used fairly regularly, because when you show this, and increasingly I am seeing figures like this used by the bank-owned investment firms, okay? Because it's one thing to produce the picture. It's another thing to execute on it. And that's where Welleman can be quite a difference. Some of us have heard the term, what's your elevator speech? And if I had to take it down to very few words, I believe it's much more, what we do is much more about finding where you are today, where you want to get there, and our job is to help you get to where you want to be. And that's not one single thing. It might be, how do you want your resources to help your grandchildren achieve something? It might be as simple as, what do you need to do to be able to buy that first home? And being able to guide somebody along that, I don't believe that type of advice will be replaced with robo-advisors or calculators online, because it's pretty hard to develop a level of trust when you're dealing with a whole range. It's pretty hard to do that through a computer program, and much better if there's a consistent advisor in place. If I were to ask most entrepreneurs, who's your trusted advisor, very rarely would it be somebody in the investment field. It's typically the CPA. So if they trust you, don't let that, make use of that trust and actually deliver things that really count to the clients. Rick, again, you stole my thunder in so many areas, Rick, it's not even funny, but again, investments, one tiny part. I mean, most of the people, quite frankly, most of their net worth is very rarely sitting in the investment assets unless they've actually monetized a business or monetized some real estate that they own. Okay? So it is a component, but it is really related to their total, financial lives. And some of it, I sometimes scratch my head how you get asked input onto upbringing of grandchildren. Saying, seriously? If they only knew, right, Peg? But it really comes down to, some of the principles that you start talking about. And, how do you apply that principle in my family? What do you think I should do in this instance? Should I give them a regular allowance? And when I talk about regular allowance with some of the families, it's, $10,000 a month, $20,000 a month. Or should I determine what they want to do and make sure they actually work for some of that money? Okay, those are some of the discussions that go on. That's so far beyond just the investment. It takes a lot of baby steps to make a big difference. And again, some of the areas across the bottom, these small steps, if you come back and clients are aware of them, so you can create value and they're not necessarily aware of the value, make sure that you're reminding people of the value and not, remember what I did last year? But remember when we made sure that your wills got caught up? Or remember when we started that financial education program for your grandkids? Those are the little steps that lead to tremendous value from the standpoint of the clients we serve. I'm often humbled when I think of growing up in a mining town in Sudbury. Life was pretty simple, and how you can deal with some of the complexity and some incredible wealth that we have the privilege of dealing with, like really interesting people that have been creative and created something that lasts. And sometimes I'm really humbled when I think about it, the privilege of doing that. Well, you don't want to let anybody down either. You want to make sure that you're doing the right thing. I want to just touch on the fiduciary concept. And most people are of the mindset that their advisors are obliged to actually do the best thing for their clients. That's in the minority. Okay? That's not the standard that is required. Now, I'm not saying that people who are in, the brokerage world or they're selling mutual funds, some of them do a great job and they actually really are in it for their clients, but that's not the standard that they're held to. Never forget back when I was working with Bruno and Maddie at Thorne Riddell many years ago, I ended up doing the audits for a number of the investment dealers. And there's been a lot of progress made then, but Pitfield Mackay Ross, which is one of the old names some of you will remember, they are now part of RBCDS through a number of mergers. But the way they operated at the time, because we had our audit room just outside, was we got a good stock today, call the sales team together, hit the phones, boys, because they had a product that they wanted to get off the shelf. Okay. Things have changed a whole lot since then. But in a different way, sometimes the product compensation model still creates that type of environment. Okay? That they are induced to sell something for their benefit and not necessarily the benefit of others. If we did that as portfolio managers, it doesn't mean that somebody couldn't do it, but if our regulators were looking at that and they do come in and do regular audits of a number of different types, we wouldn't be in business because it doesn't meet the fiduciary standard. So I want to talk just a little bit about one particular case. And unfortunately, there were two accountants from the firm that actually referred this. They would understand this immediately, but some of the holidays this week they couldn't make it. But this situation was a widow, had been a client of theirs for some time. She's over 75 at the time, and she and her husband owned a very successful business here in Toronto, to the point that he had built something pretty envious when I look back, because he had built a business that he wasn't running it at all. They lived in Sun Valley, Idaho, and part of the year, and then they lived in the Caribbean part of the year, and he would call in and get his reports, and the business made some great progress. Well, that led to a pretty interesting lifestyle, okay? Skiing, $1 million boats, and the whole bit. And then her husband died. And she had no interest in the business before, no more awareness of financial issues than literally going to the machine and taking out the amount of cash that was needed, had never paid a bill before. And her husband died. The business got sold. It got sold by the general manager of the business, who had been with them for about 50 years, that she didn't get along with at all, didn't trust, and so is now in a position, and by the way, he was the only signing authority on all of the bank accounts. Okay. We looked at some of the bank accounts up front. There was $3 million sitting in this account. It was just unbelievable. And yet she said to me, I just want to find out, I don't know whether I could actually afford to go on vacation anymore. Like, she figured her, living the life of Riley would pretty much come to an end. Sadly, the legal advisor, the lawyer that was working on the closing of the building, which is in Etobicoke here, got sold to a big condo project. He didn't think to do some of the things like make sure that the tax bills got sent to the new owner and all of that. So she's also getting flooded with requests from Ontario Hydro, property taxes and the whole bit, all of these bills coming in, and literally they got to the point she wouldn't even open them anymore because she didn't know what to do with them. The legal advisor is a really, really nice guy, and amongst one of the most incompetent lawyers I've ever met. He had over $3 million sitting in his trust account, never invested in anything, and yet she's getting all of these bills coming in. The general manager who sold the business was angry because of his severance wasn't enough. It was just like a whole confluence of problems. And here's somebody with a great deal of potential affluence, and nobody had done anything for 3 years. CPA, she absolutely trusted, and that was her anchor, but he was having difficulty moving the lawyer on to actually wrap up what he was supposed to wrap up. And I asked him at the time, I said, were you not in a position to, help, deal with the banking and stuff like that? And he said, look, I can't deal with that with CPA Ontario regulations. He says, I would be breaching some of the independence rules. I guess I'm not as familiar with some of those as the rest of you, but literally if he got too far into doing some of the work, he wouldn't have maintained the independence, I gather. So after an initial meeting, it was very down-to-earth lady at a relatively small CPA firm. And it was clear we established, well, what needs to be done? Well, clearly there were so many business loose ends that needed to be wrapped up. I felt it was important to demonstrate to her that her lifestyle, I knew it intuitively just by looking some of the numbers, that she's not going to have any problems, maintaining the lifestyle. But we actually had to show her, when you aggregated, put together a net worth statement, never seen one of those before, and that there's enough cash to provide the income, that we had to prove to her that her lifestyle could be back on track. People aren't typically looking for a better lifestyle, but they get pretty used to the lifestyle that they have had, and ideally would like to keep that going. And then it became very evident that one of the stress points was even receiving all of the information at her condo, and that just was part of the whole stress piece. So at the end of the day, what I wanted to do is to go through just the range of services that got provided, because this is wealth management, but it's custom work, because that's what the need was. So in the first 90 days, meeting with the lawyer, and literally identifying, well, where are we at? What's left outstanding? And at one point in time, it was almost comical. He said, I didn't do it because I don't know what I'm doing. That was quite an admission. She wasn't there for that conversation. But that was the reality. He had never been involved in this. I think he had been involved with when there was when they did their first wills or something similar to that. We transferred the banking away from the general manager, she's in conflict with, and that meant literally going around. I think there were 4 companies, each with a Canadian and U.S. account, and literally going around to the bank and making sure that he was off, that he was no longer a signing authority, and that she was the only signing authority. Now that sounds really simple. Try to do that during COVID, okay? The bankers won't meet with you. It was just unbelievable. And that literally took about 60 days to get something really, really simple done. I've got some banking background. I went into banking after my public accounting days. And so it's certainly not rocket science, changing signing authorities and making sure that you're set up for the future. But that relieved her from having the general manager still the only signing authority on the account. Okay? Something comical in the mix, because there were 4 Leaf tickets as well. And it's a little comical because they bought the Leaf tickets, I think, in the 50s. And back then, it didn't really matter whose name the tickets were in. It matters today because if you transfer Leaf tickets to somebody who didn't own them originally, you have to pay a big upfront fee. So we literally had to work around. Oh, and some of the tickets were in the name of a former business partner. So Craig just solved that about a week ago, finally getting the Leafs on side. They got their Leafs tickets for the year, and that was a big deal because she's going to use that as gifts for some of the family members to go to that, okay? Who would have thought that that was an important item for a client? But it was. We did the legal work here. We did that on a fee-for-service basis, same as the banking, and we also settled up with the former employee, okay? Because at the end of the day, he had put 50 years into the business. They had, one thing that the lawyer did very well is he had actually hired a compensation consultant to make sure that the prior severance was fair. And she had lived up to that, plus, but he still had a bit of an axe to grind. And I think it took another $10,000. She'd given him like $500,000 earlier, maybe another $10,000 to actually settle that up, sign off, and move on. The next 90 days, we aggregated all of the financial resources, and the good news is they had taken some of the cash and they had kept buying with any cash flow, excess cash flow coming in. They had bought TD shares, and needless to say, there was about $5 million of value in TD shares. Okay. Now, the way it was set up, that's too much concentration in anybody's portfolio, even though TD's a great security, no doubt. But it led to a discussion with the accountants of, if we liquidate that, what's going to be the tax bill? We think that's commonplace. That's not commonplace if that had been dealt with by several people in the investment business. It's just that would be the agenda. We need to diversify. Well, you do need to get there, but you also have to be mindful of what tax is created along the way. We prepared some net worth projections showing that lifestyle. And I should say the financial resources aspect, and we set it up so everything comes in one portal. One of the things we're able to accomplish with Gerald at the back is that through our portfolio management software, we even get a feed of all of the bank accounts now. So it's aggregation software that actually we're using that as a tool to very efficiently be able to pull together. So we can do a net worth statement literally in a matter of minutes. Okay? We've got all of the information flowing in. Prepared the net worth projections, and obviously she was elated when she found out that there was more than enough to actually meet the lifestyle needs. Wills had people in it that I think they were like 25 years old, had people in it. She said, I don't even know who this is. She didn't know the executor was dead that was named. Well, it was going to be her husband, but then the executor was dead, and didn't even know who would be a beneficiary of some of the things. So literally sat down. Nicholas, who works with us, who's in the estate area, was instrumental in sort of walking through that, having a very gentle conversation about what is it that you want to accomplish here, and then wills and powers of attorney were put in place. We do that as a matter of course. We typically pay for clients' wills and powers of attorney in any event if somebody's got over $1 million with us, because quite frankly, we want to see what goes in there. And many of the wills that we see, using Nicholas's terms, they are pathetic. They're not customized at all. They were done with no relationship to what their net worth statement says. And then there are no children, so there's an executorship relationship and a very sizable philanthropic gift will be made in due course. Okay. Ongoing, there is the discretionary management of all of the financial resources, and then ongoing, we retain a power of attorney to deal with all of the corporate information that comes in and corporate assets, because a number of the assets are still sitting in various companies and they have to stay there for about 3 years, just with some of the tax input. So this is not a one-off. Has anybody here run into circumstances where the clients really don't know how to put the pieces together? Jeff, you put up your hand. Just tell me the group in a few words, obviously no names, but just a little bit about the situation.
I have one going on right now. Their 96-year-old mom has died. She doesn't know what she had. English wasn't her first language, and at a certain age she forgot how to speak English, so she's been speaking an Indian dialect for a number of years, and really doesn't have any advisors per se. I was appointed to oversee money left to her by her husband so that she'd be comfortable throughout the rest of her lifetime. And so she's just died. She lives with her daughter, who's 73 years old, who had a brain aneurysm 35 years ago and is paralyzed on her left side. So she is disabled. She also has mental capacity issues. And there's money there from a house sale from the daughter, because her husband died a few years ago. There's money left from Dad. He died 11 years ago. There's a condo in Toronto where the daughter's now living, her husband having died. And nobody to pull all this together.
Right. So that's another great example. And, you know, the value, and who would they go to? Maybe the question is, how do they find you, Jeff? But the reality is, it's not easy to find somebody that people can trust. Okay? Many people will look in their own family and they can't find the people that they trust or have the competence. Okay? So when we look at things of importance to our clients, I think it's really interesting to try to find out some of the most important things, and if they if the people can actually have the capability of executing on some of those things. I think accountants are so well placed to actually identify that with often a mature client base. Okay, we'll move on. If this lady wasn't in Aspen today, I'm quite sure she would have come here and, in her own words, given a sense of how she feels, okay? And she's referred to security, she's referred to peace of mind, because she really doesn't have to worry about a lot of stuff anymore. Just go on, you know, living her life. And again, this right brain left thing, security is a feeling, not a number. So let's switch gears here a little bit and talk in more generalities. This is a picture that's showing a lot of different backgrounds, a lawyer, CPA, and CFP, et cetera. But the reality is that if you can bring a team around you that can deliver services that people need, custom services and all of that, I believe that clients will actually thank you. And the reality is, if you're really required, according to Rule 217, to actually do the due diligence before you make referrals anyhow. But if you actually put together a team that can deliver some of these services, and you're at the core of it because you're the one who's starting off with the relationship, clients, I find, are usually very willing to at least consider a different way of doing things, okay? Remember, it's better to show you're different, harder to show you're better. But different is one of the things that we're finding with the tools that demonstrate of auto-element. Some of the collaborative tools, Index happens to be a portfolio management software. Y-Charts, Bob was demonstrating here. eState Planner, behavioral finance questionnaires, Wellement, the dashboard, Redtail CRM, NaviPlan for financial planning. You know, there's a lot that goes into this. It's literally taken years, and by no means are we done in actually putting the pieces together that actually could deliver something on a comprehensive basis. But as Carrie Newhoff said, technology can be a great enabler, and it can really leverage your time. We couldn't possibly produce what Index does, for example, in pulling together portfolio reporting. We have some clients that they have portfolios. One has some at CIBC Wealth, Jarislowsky Fraser, in addition to what we manage. And we're able to pull that information into a system, aggregate it, and actually give the reporting, compare, contrast, and actually aggregate that information efficiently for high net worth individual. So there's no doubt that family wealth is complex. And you know, we know now that it's not just about investments, but there's usually, most accountants have dealt with the business owner if it's a business client. But what's really important is that you find out that the person who may not be showing up to the meetings can be a big influencer when it comes to wealth management issues. Because often what happened is, and let's face it, it was often the mom who was at home taking care of the kids, dad's out at the business, but later on in life when they've accumulated some assets, it's really important to get the feedback and input from the key decision makers. And just because the person that you've dealt with before that made the business decisions does not mean that's the final decision maker for family wealth. Ownership, just touching on that, because many people, I think, Paul, you're in the M&A business for entrepreneurial family-owned businesses. And we all know that there's a lot of, there's often a lot of discussion about passing businesses along, keeping it in the business, keeping it in the family. Often if you ask the kids, do you want to keep the business in, or would you rather have $2 million worth of cash? It's a pretty easy decision for them, okay? They observe the parents toiling away, and that's not what they want. They have something different in mind. So connecting the dots in, you know, family wealth, because it's often intergenerational as well. People want to make sure that the wealth that they've built carries on. So we got an emotional center, which is sometimes the people who aren't at the table, an equitable center where there are, how are we fair to all of the children? There might be grandkids involved and so on. And the business is the engine usually of the wealth originally. So I know that there are a number of people here who actually have gone down the path of introducing wealth advisory services. But you're in the minority. Yeah. And if you've already done that, it really begs the question, have we gone nearly as deep as we should with many of your clients? Have you gone nearly as deep in understanding what's important to your clients and then delivering on that? I think it's gratifying to get a big thank you for delivering on something that was important. I don't know how big, or let's face it, I've been the buyer of CPA services for a long time. And I don't get a big charge out of getting my audited financial statements. Sorry, guys. Okay. There's no emotional connection to that. But if somebody shows me how to save a lot of tax, or if somebody shows me something unique relative to passing along wealth, I'm interested in that. That's a lot of value from the buyer standpoint. So think about, even if you have engaged in this, there's probably a long way to go in drilling in and finding out how you could actually serve the needs of clients. For those who haven't done that and would like to explore that further, we're very interested in having a discussion with you. And then we actually have a champions training that goes on. I think it's a month from now.
Yeah.
I think it's in the package.
It's 4 Thursdays in November. I've got information.
Okay, very good. So the Accountable Support Program determined the interest of CPA partners, and the reality is if it's a multi-partner firm, very rarely do you get a common interest between the different partners. But often when you go back and you think about it, how often there was somebody who was the lead in all of the new ideas, or most of the new ideas, and there's somebody who's a follower, and then we might even have somebody who's digging their heels in on virtually every issue and saying, we've never done it that way. That doesn't mean that a firm can't proceed, because usually it's done at an individual partner or level determination. CPA firms must qualify. In the early days, it was, can you fog a mirror? That doesn't work for us anymore. And the reality is that if there is a good understanding of the CPA's interest, an understanding of their client base, and so on, we can then determine whether this is really going to add value to them, to us, and to the clients. Okay? So we do have a process to go through to determine both quantitatively and qualitatively whether there's a good fit. The first 90 days, once somebody decides to do that, we have some initial training. We do what's called a client priority survey. And Mark Goodfield at the back used to be part of a mid-size firm. And Mark, I remember the numbers even if, well, you're a good numbers guy, so you probably do too. But when we did this client survey to determine what, and the clients disclose what they have in assets, okay, not their net worth, but assets that were in the investment pool. Now you take it, I think we had a 40% response rate, so you do some extrapolation. But the information came back, it was over $1 billion, okay? Now, this is a great opportunity for CPA firms, but typically you don't have any way to quantify, well, how big is the opportunity? This is a simple way to actually quantify how big that opportunity is. And then obviously making sure that your team is aware and ready. Understanding how to go about and introduce something, what clients are going to go through is a very important component. It creates confidence in actually being able to implement once you start something. Ideal client profiles, got to thank Rick again for this. We've got some of these pretty well defined now and on a one-pager each. What we found is business owners. Business owners, much more than executives, are great wealth management clients. The executive, if they've been at the level where they're getting stock options and that sort of thing, yes, but the business owner is usually where the greatest opportunity is. And it might be a former business owner. But many of them, they have the same mindset whether they're currently owners or they're former owners. Widows, I gave the example, and this is a very widespread issue. I think it's sort of the demographics, where many of the women that were that are dealing with wealth now, they were not engaged in the workforce. They were taking care of children, and so some of this stuff is a mystery. They often want to honor a spouse, and honoring a spouse can even be, well, I want to continue to work with the same people we did. That's not necessarily in their best interest. But a CPA can be in a position to actually say, I understand you've been working with Bill for 35 years, but I just want to show you, or let's have a look and see if what Bill is doing is what you need today. Medical professionals as well, because many of them are incorporated and now, and that creates some opportunity. Ongoing education is very key, and so thanks to Bob, this is a COVID project. When we couldn't communicate directly, we started to do online videos, and now those videos are done where we actually store them in a due diligence library to tell people about a concept that we've done. It's often an investment concept, could be a concept on IPPs that Trevor's going to talk about now. And those are ideal because if there's a concept you want to relate to a client, you can go to the due diligence library and say, well, let me share the video with you. Okay? And the video will describe a concept. So one of those simple concepts that we've done a lot of is with a company called Western Wealth, and it's where people are going in and they're buying, this company buys apartment buildings, puts washers and dryers in, brings the rent up to current level, and installs a place to get their Amazon packages. And that simple change has led to a very, very attractive investment idea. I can't tell everybody that message personally, but I can send them a due diligence or a concept video, and they can get it pretty quickly. I'm just going to go through that. That was the pricing that we, on the left here, that we typically sort of standard pricing for clients. And on the right, some of you will know that we do share some of our revenue. It has to be disclosed to clients, but we do share revenue with CPA firms. And one of the things we've been asked increasingly is, if I don't want to take fees, can I pass along what I would have gotten to my clients as a discount? The answer is yes. Okay. So a very simple thing to do. Any questions? I think we're down to how many minutes? 5 minutes? 5 minutes? Are there any questions that I can address? Okay.
Paul, I have a question. Would you be willing to touch on, excellent talk by the way, the benefits of integrating wealth management from the angle that is wealth stewards? We're primarily working with the CPA firms. Most of them are here. Where do they fit in the process? Is it on an ongoing basis? How well have you integrated wealth management with the CPAs? Where do they fit in? With some of the software, can you touch on that? Earlier you were asking, do they have access to Element, for example? Do they have access to some of our systems that we use as you are giving wealth management to clients? So can you just take the CPAs through the journey?
Sure.
Is it just them giving us clients, then we take over from there, but on an ongoing basis, how well do they integrate?
So, thank you for asking that, Gerald, because it's great. I wish I actually had a pictorial of it, but the reality is, obviously at the onset, an introduction, we would like CPAs then to review, let's say we prepare a financial plan, and we have this program called Initial Assessment and Evaluation, where we actually gather information, no commitment on the part of the client, and we produce a report. And the report is meant to say, well, here are the gaps that we've identified. We would like CPAs to review that, but the reality of what we've often found is the CPAs are often too busy. Okay, so some of that may be our failing in not being, pushing that issue more. I would love to see CPAs involved periodically, probably once a year, to actually go through and be having the discussion about taxation. Rick, we've actually had some discussions about that, and I think that's going to become more of a reality. As it is right now, we will often reach out. We typically will get a copy of the tax return that's been done. We'll often get a copy of the financial statements so that we even understand what the client situation is. But I think there's a lot more integration there. We've got the tools, but it's just like anything. We have to do a better collective job of actually on the communication of that. We're in prime time for this issue. Peggy alluded to it. Markets are down right now, and the reality is there are some clients of CPAs that have actually had sizable capital gains over the last 3 years, and we can look at a portfolio today and we could spot certain things that are down today, capital loss. We could literally crystallize that capital loss and go back and recoup some of the taxes that were paid before. Okay? Who doesn't like to get tax back? How often does that happen? But that's a really simple example, Gerald, of the integration. And before the end of the year, we're on a concerted basis going to be going through that very issue. I hope that Carrie's messaging as well to CPAs about time management is taken seriously, because I sometimes look at the life that the CPAs are leading, and it's a frenetic life. Okay? I'm sure there's lots of money being made, but there's just so much activity that goes on in a CPA's world that I think if you can get to the point that you can be spending more of your time on things that are less routine and of greater interest to, really important to your clients, in some cases it's a lot fewer clients, providing more value to those people who are the greatest clients. So I guess it's a little bit of an admission that I think we got a long way to go as we integrate, but certainly the tools are there. Any other questions? Yes.
One thing, I was thinking about what Carrie said. We only got 40 hours out of the 168 and all that stuff. But we've done a lot of courses in the U.S. And one of the things that we found that the firms are really good at having their wealth management integrated with their firms is their W-2. Their tax, personal tax, and a lot of their corporate clients are LLCs, so there's no corporate returns. Basically, they take their QuickBooks, make the adjustments to a corporate tax. But I keep thinking to Rick's dashboard. If we could integrate that dashboard with our personal tax service, I think we'd find a whole lot more opportunities. Because I know the business owners, it's where we're primarily looking now with our clients for, Stewards opportunities. But I think risk management is huge. I think, how do you retire? Estate planning.
That's way beyond the business owners. That's absolutely right. So it's interesting, Harold. I mean, I remember back having discussions with some of the tax providers, literally saying, could you data mine? Could you say, I want a list of everybody that's got over X dollars in interest income, dividend income, that sort of thing. Those tools are available. It's a matter of picking up the tools and actually taking the time to work with them.
You get data mine. Who's got children under 60?
Yeah.
And then ask them the question, do you have insurance?
Yeah, there's no shortage of opportunity ahead of us. So in the interest of time, I think we're bang on 2:00, and Trevor's got the hook out already, so I'll be here later on, but thank you for your attention.